All right. Good morning, Urban Faith. I'm so glad to have you today. We are talking about something so special, which is the 50th anniversary of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech has inspired us and inspire others to honor and celebrate the legacy through a project called Share the Dream. And so today I am here with the commentator, the journalist, the host, the co-host for this project, Mr. Chris Broussard, who has just been such a phenomenal pioneer and someone who's been at the forefront of helping push the dream forward. And so I'm so glad to have you here with us, Mr. Broussard. Chris, good to meet you.
It's great to join you, Alan. And wow, thank you for that introduction. I'll try to live up to it in this interview, but it's great to be with you guys at Urban Faith. And this Share the Dream project is something that's special, something that's anointed, and something that we do hope and believe can have a great impact in our country.
Absolutely. And so just to get started, my first question is kind of, why did you feel like you wanted to be part of this project? You know, there's so much stuff we hear about Dr. King kind of out there in the world. People talk about him and take him out of context all the time. And this is really an opportunity to celebrate, to honor, to really bring forth the principles of his legacy. Why did you decide to get involved in this project?
Well, there are a few things. One is that obviously, Dr. King did tremendous work on behalf of the kingdom of God and for this country during his lifetime. And I always tell people, most people look at Dr. King as a great hero for African Americans. But in reality, he was a hero for all Americans, and particularly white Americans.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the way white Americans, I'm generalizing, but for the most part, the way white America was treating Black America and other citizens of color, it was incredibly inhumane and unjust and put them at great odds with God.
Yeah.
And so he came with lessons that taught them some things and had them look in the mirror and in many ways, improve the situation. Obviously, we still have a ways to go.
Yeah.
But I thought he definitely was of great service, not only to African Americans, but to white Americans too, because it did get this white America in line more with the principles of God. So obviously he's been a hero of mine. So just being able to be a part of and involved in something that was promoting his principles, I was all in for that. Secondly, you look at our country and it is obviously, I don't even have to state how polarized things are right now.
Yeah.
Between Black and white, between Republican and Democrat.
Yeah.
However, we could just go on and on about the various identity groups that are at odds with one another. Look, obviously, America's never been Shangri-La for
Right.
Black people, but for me, this is the most polarized that I've seen this country. And I was born in the late 1960s, so I wasn't born in a time of, where there was great racial relationship between Black and white. But obviously in the 60s, you were seeing some improvements. But this now is incredibly polarizing to the point where an election that's coming up or, could spark all types of, untoward acts on whatever side, from whatever side doesn't win, And I think one of the major reasons that our nation is so polarized, and that, let's keep it real, the church isn't having the impact on our society that we would like it to have.
Yeah.
Because the church is divided.
Yeah.
Between Black and white. You can argue in some cases, in many cases, that the church may be more divided than the world when it comes to race.
Wow.
And our inability to come together on a kingdom agenda, our inability of Black and white Christians to unite on a kingdom agenda, a biblical agenda, rather than a left wing or a right wing agenda, has, really ruined our witness and ruined our ability to be salt and light in this country. Jesus himself said, a house divided, the house divided cannot stand.
Right.
And so the church's division and inability to be unified has wrecked our witness here in America and our ability to really speak with power and effectiveness to this whole racial situation. So hopefully this Share the Dream project can bring about some unity in the church. And we don't want a false unity. We don't want paternalism. We don't want just hugs and smiles, but no real meat and substance behind the unity. There are things that need to be addressed. There are things that need to be done for the Black community. And so we don't shy away from any of that. So I thought that this was an opportunity to address some of that and hopefully bring about some real racial unity within the body of Christ. And then finally, quickly, you mentioned that Dr. King is often, all types of people are throwing out quotes from Dr. King and, I have a dream and, just really out of context to your point. And even, I don't know if they have ulterior motives, but certainly I think they're out of step sometimes with the motives that Dr. King had. And so this project where we focus on 6 of the principles that guided Dr. King's life and ministry, one of them, we can get to those, but one of them is justice. And we always hear about the love and things like that, but he was also much deeper than just love. The 6 principles, I'll just say them now, were love, consciousness, or conscience, which is big. We want to awaken people's conscience to just what's going on. And to the racial problems that still exist in this country, and that Dr. King addressed, especially later in his life, where he really was addressing economics and stuff like that. But so love, conscience, perseverance, hope, justice is a big one, of course, justice, and finally freedom. So I just thought it was an opportunity to get beyond just the superficial quote things that people, kind of have turned some of Dr. King's great phrases into, and really go to the substance and try to get the substance of what he was about. And again, hopefully that can help change our situation in the church and in this country overall.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more that, in a lot of ways, it feels like we see Dr. King as a meme, right? Like it's just a picture on social media with a quote taken out of context, and people don't even know for the I have a dream speech, that he starts with laying out the problems before he gets to a vision for what's, what we could do together. Can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to have a vision going forward, and why it's so important to learn from our history and address those realities before we rush to the vision that God might have for us, being united and being one?
No, that's a great question, because a lot of times you hear talk about racial reconciliation, and to some people, like I said, does that mean a hug? Does that mean, just some superficial gatherings, but really not addressing the issues that left us unreconciled and leave us unreconciled? Dr. King, as you said, most people don't even know that he addressed those issues before he got to I Have a Dream and all of that stuff. And of course, later in his life, he really, to some degree, was distraught and disheartened when he really looked at the economic differences.
Yeah.
And obviously he knew that, but you know, in the South, I mean, the racism was so overt that they were addressing those situations. Blacks couldn't go here, blacks couldn't go there. You just address those issues.
Right.
And then when you went up to the North, and you saw the economic conditions that many African Americans were living in, and you know, there wasn't always in the North the legal segregation, but blacks were clearly getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
It really disheartened him, and he had to rethink, and was in the process of even thinking like, okay, how are we going to address this?
Yeah.
You know, and he did have ideas, and he talked about, you know, redistribution of wealth, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think the key is that, and this is what I talked about, you know, our white brothers and sisters, in many ways, particularly in the church,
yeah,
have been miseducated on the history of America.
Yes.
No,
Listen.
All the talk about a great Christian nation, and you know, manifest destiny, and the city on the hill.
City on the hill.
What about the way African Americans and Native Americans were treated? You know,
Yeah.
And so that miseducation informs the way a lot of whites view the racial situation today.
Yeah.
You know, and so by using a lot of Dr. King's principles and teaching, like, we want to hopefully shed light on how the true racial history of America, as bad as it was in the past, but also how it impacts us today.
Yeah.
How it impacts the disparities you see today, and the tension and the distrust that you see today, and all the events that we've seen in the past few years. All of that is a remnant, to some degree, of much of it, of the past.
Yeah.
The wealth gap. That's not just because whites have worked hard and blacks haven't. It's not because of that at all. It is because of things like the Federal Housing Administration loans that were given out to mainly, overwhelmingly white Americans from the 1930s on into the 1960s, that built these beautiful white suburbs.
Yeah.
And then the redlining that was a part of that, and the redlining of the African American neighborhoods that have cost African American families on average hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, so these are the things. It's not just let's go have dinner together and be friends. It is, let's address these economic issues that really were created by the racism of the past, and address those. And then that can be some real racial unity, and we can have some real robust discussions about how we can solve these problems that we have today. So yeah, I think that's, you know, part of what we're trying to do with Share the Dream.
It's, you know, so important to carry those lessons forward. And I'm interested to know, as you outline the 6 principles beautifully, you know, that conscience and justice and hope and perseverance, and that I'm curious, what principles have you seen stand out in your own life or be most influential to you? Or what was your favorite ones to share in the series? Because as you outlined, they guided Dr. King's life and legacy. They're not just things that, you know, that sound good to put on a t-shirt. Again, to put us back in context for how this man lived and why he's so influential. What are some ones that stood out to you? Can you pick one or two that you have really been impacted by or really trying to carry forward?
Yeah, man, there's so many. I think to some degree, I've addressed a little bit of the conscience of really making America, and in particular, many of our white Christian brothers and sisters aware of the true history of this country. I've even talked to whites who have been like, as they've talked about City on the Hill and the great Christian heritage of America, who have, talked about slavery as if it was just a little blind spot. It was just a little, really like,
like a mistake, right?
Yeah, it was just a little, it's like you're trying to, as an individual, I'm trying to live for Christ and I'm walking well, but I do have this one little area that I'm struggling with. That's how some have described it. And it's like, no, do you understand that the reason America was able to become the greatest superpower we've ever seen was on the backs of slavery.
Yeah.
And the Atlantic slave trade and the rice and the sugar and the cotton and the tobacco, that all was, that blacks were forced to pick and so on and stuff like that. Those industries that were built off our backs.
Yeah.
And so that is a part of it, trying to just awaken that consciousness within white Americans to understand, because, you can go through the history of the way the history of America has been taught, particularly in the South.
Yeah.
About even today, let's keep it real.
Yes,
we see it about slavery having benefits for African Americans and, things like that.
Yeah.
That is utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
That is only a fraction of how American history has historically been taught in the South and other parts of the country, but particularly in the South, the Daughters of the Confederacy and, all of this, the benevolent institution of slavery and Africa, it was great for African Americans. It exposed us to Christianity and, never mind that Christianity was in Africa before it was in Europe, but that's a whole nother discussion.
Right.
So white, if you don't understand the root of a problem and an issue, then it's going to be hard for you to solve it and have a proper understanding of how you can solve it. So I think that's the conscience. I could focus more on justice as well, but I think that the justice quickly, somewhat to what I said earlier, like, racism, yes, we see overt acts here and there.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is subtle. And you really, you don't just see it necessarily every day. And you see whites and blacks interacting, favorably, often. So if you don't have a deeper understanding of it and really dig beneath the surface, you can get the wrong idea of, the racial situation in America today. And like I said, when you look at the fact that, the whites were given up to $120 billion in loans, government FHA housing loans. You look at the GI Bill and how that benefited a lot of whites, some blacks, but not nearly as many blacks per capita as it did whites. And things like that have created the wealth gap and all of that. That's a part of the justice, we need to look at. And I think, so I'll quickly just throw out one more, the perseverance. Like a lot of time, I think a lot of people have been beaten down, particularly African Americans, by the situation in America today.
A
lot of people
of the oppression.
Yes. And whether giving up, whether just decided, nothing can improve for us overall, for me individually. So I'm just gonna, it can affect your decision-making and things like that. Whereas you look back in the day when Dr. King was marching, and even before that, in the face of even worse oppression, you did have, I would say, you probably had more perseverance and hope within the Black community than you do today. And I believe a lot of that was because Dr. King and many of the people that were working with him were rooted in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And when you're rooted in Christ, no matter how bad things look on the outside, you will have hope.
Yeah.
As bad as things look in this country, I do have hope because of the gospel and the transformative power of the gospel and how it can change a person and a people's outlook on life, worldview, and decision-making, behavior, all of that. And I think that's what our ancestors had, and that's what gave them the perseverance and the hope through slavery, through Jim Crow, that, to be honest, with more freedom today, even though we haven't reached where we need to get, with more opportunities and freedom today, many of us lack the same perseverance and hope that our ancestors had. So that's something I would, want to highlight as well. Why did they have that hope? And let me tap into that reason behind hope and their perseverance.
Yeah, they were so rooted in their faith. And I really appreciate this series pointing that out, highlighting that, bringing that to the forefront, because a lot of times people forget that Dr. King was a minister, right? Like he wasn't some great preacher, great speaker, and marcher. He was a minister.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions. This one is really kind of, you being part of this project, you worked with some amazing people. And I mean, just hearing about being able to work with Ambassador Young and, Chaplain Barry Black and all these folks who have been tapped into doing this kind of work, and, Ambassador Young being there, right? Like he was there. What are some of the lessons that you feel like people take away from being able to hear from some elders and from some other folks who are part of the project, in the video series, in the curriculum? What are some of your hopes for what people take away from it?
Well, I think that's a great question. And one, I think Ambassador Young, he obviously gets accolades and people understand and talk about what he did in the past and his involvement in the movement and all of that. But I don't think people understand and really fully give him the credit for just being how great of a man he is.
Yeah.
And to your point, a man of faith.
Yes.
Again, people want to divorce the faith of Dr. King from what he did. They want to divorce I could go on and on. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Marcus Garvey, even, who was a Christian. Like, people want to divorce. They want to look at these great actions of our ancestors and not look at the source of their power and the source of their, wisdom and the things that they fought for and fought against and stated and so on and so forth. And Ambassador Young is also like that. Ambassador Young is a great man of faith.
Yeah.
And I get that we should focus on the other things he talks about and the things he fights for. And you don't always, you're not always, everything's not a religious conversation and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it is important that people understand, especially in this day and age where faith is being marginalized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where the Christian faith that has sustained us as a community and as a people is now being marginalized, tossed aside, watered down, and things like that. It's important to see in a great man like Ambassador Young that his faith has always been vibrant and to this day is vibrant. Yeah. And that's what motivated him and led him to be able to do and have the strength to do what he did. And I think also you mentioned elders. Yeah. It's important. One thing I'd see, because I try to work with, like one thing I think is very important for the Black community is to build up our family structure. I didn't even say rebuild our family structure of husband, wife, and children. And a lot of young African Americans today don't even know that the Black family structure hasn't always been this in this situation that is in the day where now 70% of Black children are born without the father and mother being married in the home. Yeah. Whereas up from 1880 or 1890 to 1960, it was 80 to 90% of Black children were born with the mother and father in the home. Again, in worse conditions. Even up to 1960, it was 60%, or up to 1980, I'm sorry, it was 60% of children. When I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a predominantly Black neighborhood, in Indianapolis, Indiana, with a very integrated neighborhood with a lot of Blacks, almost all of them, the father was there, and the father and mother were there. And so learning from our elders who can share these things. And I brought that up to say that when I work with young men about fatherhood and being fathers and things like that, a lot of young brothers want to get married. They want to be good fathers and all that. But in many cases I've seen, because they didn't have that example, and they didn't grow up seeing that, even if the man and the wife, they're people of faith and they love the Lord and all that, they don't know practically the practical ways that you sustain a marriage and have a great marriage. And they run into problems because of that. And that's one thing. So one thing we do in my organization, the King Movement, is we try to link up the younger brothers with older brothers who have been married, and have, know the practical things you need to know and learn to have a successful marriage. And so I think this is just a macro element of that, where the elders and the youth need to have conversations. Our youth need to learn from our elders. We see in the Bible in 1 John where it talks about the elders and the older men teaching the younger men, and the older women teaching the younger women. We're losing that. And so, we got young people teaching young people through music and whatever, Hollywood and all that. We need the elders teaching the young respecting the elders, and the elders learning, some things and listening to the young. And so that's something I hope can, I think people can get out of this. And then finally, like you said, we got some great people, successful people in the project. And so I think it's important for people to see people that they respect for various reasons, because they're a great broadcaster, they're a great journalist, they're a great rapper even. Lecrae is involved. Like, you see things like that, and then you see them working on a project like this and understand it's deeper and it goes beyond just your secular job. But these are people rooted in faith who really want to address these issues that are so pertinent to our society. And so, because a lot of times the people you see on television talking about these things, not to knock any of them, many of them have good ideas, but a lot of times the people on the ground floor and a lot of times really doing a lot of the work, they don't get a voice. They don't get a platform. And it's kind of the same talking heads a lot of times that get the voice and the platform from whatever view they have. And there are a lot of people, as you know, in the neighborhoods, on the ground level, who are doing great things. Their voice needs to be heard as well.
I think that's so important. And you talked about this intergenerational move that you hope comes out of this, and the work that you're doing with the King Foundation, bringing together generations. My last question is, what would you say? A lot of the folks who are watching and listening in Urban Faith, they're young people, right? They may be college age, they may be just starting careers. What advice, what wisdom would you share with them about how to carry forward this legacy in a faithful way? What's your advice for the next generation?
That's a great question. One, I would say that my principles I've lived by that have served me very well, like the three most important, like the way I prioritize things in my life is, number one, God. Number two, family. And number three, career. I don't put my career above my family.
Yeah.
And obviously those things overlap a lot. And, if you're serving God, you're going to serve your family. Yep. And to serve your family and lead your family, you need to have, a job and be able to provide and things like that. So they overlap, but that's the order: God, family, career. And I think that is one thing I would say to the young: keep those priorities. And then I would just say that when you are successful, you need to look at how you can help others.
Yeah.
Certainly focus on your individual career and providing for your family and all of that. But one thing that has helped the African-American community persevere and thrive in many ways in the midst of this oppression and stuff was the fact that we worked together.
Yeah.
I mentioned a Frederick Douglass, a Harriet Tubman, a Sojourner Truth. They were all former slaves. At one time they were slaves. And when they got their freedom, they didn't just, I got mine.
Right.
I got mine. Like, right, let me just live it up. No, they went back and helped free other slaves and fought for the rights of all African-American people. And look, one thing in America, because of the racist structure that has been, whites have the luxury of kind of thinking strictly as an individual, because the system has, taken care of white Americans for the most part.
Yeah.
Well, Black America has never, even though we get educated in the same way, so many of us do have that same me mentality. But when you look at our history, you look at our current plight, we have a completely different history in this country than white Americans. We have a completely different contemporary plight than white Americans.
Yeah.
We can't afford as a people to just be me. If an African American is wildly successful as an athlete and makes all this great money and everything, that's great. We love that. We salute that. We applaud that. But we need that brother to help the broader African American community. We really do.
Yeah.
And I've heard athletes even say, well, nobody's saying to the white athlete that they need to help the broader white community. Well, that's because the government and all the systems in America are helping the broader white community.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to understand that. And finally, I'll throw this out, not knowing how young many of the viewers may be, but when I speak to like high school kids, even younger, junior high, maybe college, but particularly the younger, I tell them the decisions you make over the next 8 to 10 years of your life, maybe it's 12 years, depending on your age, they will affect the way you live and they will affect your life for the 40, 50, 60 years after that.
Wow.
The decision, the reason I'm at where I'm at, have written for the New York Times, have worked at ESPN, now at Fox Sports. The reason I've been able to do what I'm doing, my wife is an African-American woman, a medical doctor. The reason we are in the position we're in is because of the decisions that we made when we were in high school.
Wow.
And in college.
Yeah.
And to be honest, a lot of it too, particularly in junior high and high school, is the decisions our parents made.
Yeah.
To force us, I'm just keep it real, to force me to study and force me to put my academics and make it a high priority. I'm gonna be honest, in my mind, I love sports more than books, but my father was like, there won't be any sports for you if there aren't books and if you aren't doing well in school. And I would say to all of our parents out there, whether it's a single mother, single father, nuclear family, whatever it may be, you direct your child into, focusing on education, because in this society, in American society, the way you get ahead is through education.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, unless you're just some super athlete, super musician, rapper, whatever it may be, there are those, but those are few and far between.
Yeah.
For the majority of people, the way you get ahead in this country is through education.
Yeah.
So I would say definitely focus on that as well. And know that you can do it. Don't ever, I'll say this, I never, as an African-American growing up, and there were times I was in all white schools, for, you know, overwhelmingly white schools. I never felt like I couldn't be just as great of a student as them. I never felt like I couldn't be a better student than them.
Yeah.
In my 8th grade, junior high, my brother and I were the only African Americans in the school.
Wow.
And I was the valedictorian in my 8th grade class. And so I never think you can't be just as smart as anyone else. Yeah. Never think you can achieve just as much as anyone else, no matter what somebody tells you or says to you. And so definitely know that you can be just as smart, you can be just as successful academically as anyone else, any other race.
I appreciate so much the time, Chris, for you sharing, for your work on the Share the Dream project. It'll be available. Folks, check this out. You want to not just see the memes of Dr. King, you're going to hear about the I Have a Dream speech. Dig in, especially people of faith, to how faith informed who Dr. King was. I thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.